We were 15-1 on our week 13 predictions. On today's show, we have our week 14 predictions, best bets, and more. You don't want to miss out. Let's get into it. As I mentioned, I was 15-1 last week on our week 13 predictions. Great week, by the way. It just let's just say Baltimore. They kind of screwed me in the end. But Amir is not here today, but he was 13-3. Still our great records on the season, 71% for myself and 67 for the other co-host, which again, Amir is busy. He's a collegiate athlete. But let's get into our week 14 predictions here. Now, on Thursday night tonight, we have a great matchup with Green Bay going to Detroit and of course, having a rematch from a few weeks ago. Now, Detroit won their first matchup. We know it's incredibly hard in division to beat a team twice in a single season. And even though Detroit is home, I feel like this could be a bit of a trap game, even though we know that Green Bay is a really good team. So, Green Bay on the road, I actually like them in this matchup. Again, if Jordan Love can protect the football, I like their chances against most teams. And we know that's a big if. But at the end of the day, it's hard to beat a team twice. I'm going to roll with Green Bay on the road in the NFC North matchup. Amir's going to take the opposition. Now, as we head into the Sunday slate, it's pretty chalk here for us. And I hate to do that, but at this point in the season, when you're picking straight up, well, you just got to pick who you think's going to win. Pittsburgh is at home. Again, hard to beat a team twice. New Orleans on the road. They just lost Taysom Hill. Interested to see that one. The Giants might actually be able to get that one if they can just key in on Alvin Kamara. Miami getting a big win there against the Jets, keeping their playoff hopes somewhat alive, even though they're pretty much already out of it. Tennessee getting a win there. It's not a much needed win, but at this point, you know the players don't care about their draft position. Now, we have an interesting matchup here between Atlanta and Minnesota. We'll get back to that in just a moment. We have Philly beating Carolina, Tampa Bay beating the Raiders. But let's get into this Atlanta matchup. I have Atlanta on the road getting a huge win here to, I guess, stay alive in their division race there in the NFC South, excuse me. Now, Atlanta, you are on a 3-game losing streak. It's not pretty. Kirk Cousins just threw 4 interceptions in a single game last week. On the year, you're 3-2 on the road. You go into Minnesota, which has been a very difficult place to play. One of the most underrated places as far as difficulty here in the NFL. But Atlanta comes in with the 7th ranked offense, 21st ranked defense. They have the talent, right? We know this. They just need to find their groove and play their best football, which I believe we haven't seen yet. And especially with how Bijan is playing, the team just needs to get on his back, kind of like how the Eagles got on Saquon's back. They go into Minnesota. Minnesota's won 5 straight games. They're 5-1 at home. 13th best offense, 12th best defense. Now we know Kirk Cousins was probably the biggest name in this past year's free agency outside of those star running backs. Now he of course spent years in Minnesota after his early years there in Washington, and he was successful in Minnesota. They had a couple playoff runs, not much playoff success, but again, he's a good quarterback, not a great quarterback, and we all know that about Kirk Cousins. Now he moved to Atlanta. And now Atlanta, again, has had their best quarterback in years, and they are 6-6. So honestly, not that much of an improvement as far as the win-loss department that you expected to see with their favorable schedule. Now, I will say Atlanta, going forward, has a very easy schedule, but Tampa Bay's right on their neck. If the Saints get another win, they're going to be in the mix. So Atlanta needs this win after, again, losing 3 straight on the road. Not going to be easy. Now, for the Vikings, you rebounded after losing Kirk Cousins. You go out there and you grab Sam Darnold. On paper, we said, the Vikings, Sam Darnold, are we serious? They have the talent around the quarterback, but they don't have the main position filled out to be a, I guess, reliable team or a consistent team, a good team at that. Well, that's the power of coaching. Brian Flores has this defense playing at one of the highest levels we've seen of this unit in the last 10 years. And then you add on the fact that Sam Darnold has revitalized his career with Kevin O'Connell helping him out. And this team is 10-2, fighting for a number 1 seed in the NFC. So they need this win just as bad as Atlanta. And in Kirk Cousins' revenge game, I know the popular pick is going to be with Minnesota here at home, again, fighting for the number 1 seed. But I think Kirk Cousins gets back on track. I think if he loses this game, they're going to start having questions. hey, how early do we throw in Michael Penix into the mix? Do we get him some games here at the end of the season to maybe just, I guess, give this offense a boost, which they haven't had in recent weeks because of Kirk Cousins' subpar performances? But for Minnesota, again, you need this win just as bad as them to fight for the number one seed. I think it's a trap game. I think Atlanta, behind Bijan Robinson, they're going to get a huge win here and probably a classic there in the early slate on Sunday. In the 4 o'clock window, in the late game window, Arizona, I have, again, winning that game against Seattle. You see a trend here. Hard to beat a team twice, and when they're home in that second matchup, I'm going to go in their favor, so Arizona gets a big win there. San Fran gets back on track now with Isaac Guerendo leading the running back room. It's just been a tough season for the San Francisco 49ers, but at the end of the day, they have a top 3 coach in the league. They have a top 3 roster in the league, despite all the injuries. We know when it comes to playoff time, none of these teams in the NFC are going to say, we want to play San Fran in the first round. Even if you win the game, you're going to be a lot more banged up than you would be compared to facing other teams. So San Francisco are still a sleeping giant despite all the struggles that they have had. And again, they need a big win. They get it here, and they keep this NFC West oh so close going forward. Buffalo going to LA to play the Rams. That's going to be a shootout. The Rams desperately need a win to keep their playoff hopes alive. Buffalo, they're fighting for the number one seed, even though they need some help from a team on Sunday Night Football. But Buffalo, they're just clicking on all cylinders. They arguably have the MVP of the league right now. I think he's the front runner in Josh Allen. And whether if they're throwing the ball, running the ball, whether if it's sunny, rainy, right, whatever weather conditions, this Buffalo team just looks too complete. Now, that secondary is always going to be in question, and the Rams, as we know, have the receiving talent to expose this Buffalo secondary. But again, the blueprint is out there. You need to double team these wide receivers on the Rams offense and key in on the run. I think after that, it's pretty much hard to move the ball for the Rams, as we've seen in a lot of their losses. Regardless, Buffalo, they're too complete at the moment. We're going to roll with them on the road, getting another big-time win for Josh Allen's resume. Sunday Night Football. This is a big matchup, not only for the fact that the Chargers are going to the Chiefs, 2 defenses that are clicking on elite cylinders. They're 2 top 3 defenses in the league in this Sunday night matchup, but it's a big storyline for a couple of reasons. The defenses, for one, of course. The Chargers trying to keep their playoff lives alive, right? And again, they are well in the playoffs at the moment. I think a big win here would pretty much solidify their playoff berth. More so, right? Again, a couple weeks after that, but still having 8 or 9 wins at this point in the season, getting a big win on Kansas City, we would all consider them a playoff berth. Now, for Kansas City, you come into this matchup with only 1 loss, and you've already beaten the Chargers. And you see this trend in my predictions this week where if it's a divisional matchup and you already beat that team twice, I like to go in the other team's favor because it's incredibly hard to beat a team twice in the season. But none of those teams that I've mentioned before are the Kansas City Chiefs. They are clicking in all cylinders, right? Even though they're squeaking out these wins, they're maybe not playing their highest caliber of football. So I go back to my earlier statement, but they're just bored. And I've had this conversation with people off the podcast where I think that they're kind of in their mid-2010 New England Patriots era, right? Where there's some questions. You're like, do they have enough to win it all? They're squeaking by with some wins. They're only winning 11, 12 games in a season. Of course, this Chiefs team is different. But it seems like, they're just bored, right? They don't need to go out there and dominate teams like the Detroit Lions are, even though that would be nice to see. They're just doing enough to win these games. They're not going over, out of their way to put a statement victory out there. Again, against a team like Carolina. Detroit blew them out. Kansas City didn't, right? But do I think that Detroit is miles better than Kansas City? No. I think Kansas City just knows what's important at the end of the day, and that's just getting the win. At the end of the day, that is all that matters. Now, for this matchup specifically, I think it's going to be a big passing game. I think Xavier Worthy has a huge day. I think Ladd McConkey has a huge day. It's going to be a shootout, that classic shootout between Justin Herbert and Patrick Mahomes, even though these offenses haven't had those high-powered offenses as far as the passing game like they have in recent years. It's gonna be a fun game, right? I don't think it's gonna be the run-heavy defensive affair that we all believe that history tells us it's gonna be based on what we've seen this season. So Kansas City gets a big win there. They remain at the number 1 seed. Monday Night Football, this one's quick. We're taking Cincy on the road. Dallas with Cooper Rush. They're okay, right? I mean, Rico Dowdle was had their first 100-yard rushing game by a single player in a very long time. So shout out to Rico Dowdle making the most out of this opportunity. But for Dallas, it's just too late. And I think since he gets a big win on the road to save Zach Taylor's job in 2024. Now let's get to our power rankings on the week, as of course I love to do these for you guys, and I like to bring a lot of excitement to these. And every week I like to go one by one, to explain to you guys why certain teams moved up or down. Unfortunately, everybody did pretty much what they were supposed to do in this past week in week 13, so that kind of makes these boring. But let's get into them. My top 10 has not changed, except for one thing. Baltimore goes down to 5. Of course, they lost a close one there to Philly, even though I think the scoreboard did Baltimore justice in that matchup. Again, if Justin Tucker can make his kicks like he has in his entire career, I think Baltimore might even win that game against Philly. Regardless, Philly moves up one spot into the top 4. Baltimore drops to 5. Not a big difference there. Both teams, I think, are still high caliber teams in their respective conferences. Detroit stays at 1, Kansas City at 2, Buffalo at 3. Those have not changed for the last couple of weeks. Minnesota at 6, Pittsburgh at 7, Green Bay at 8. Even though Green Bay has a huge opportunity to get into the top 5 here against the Detroit Lions. Would love to see that happen. I'm a big Jordan Love fan. The Chargers at 9 and the Denver Broncos at 10. Now, the Broncos, it didn't look pretty, all right? Jerry Jeudy had a game, and my Cleveland Browns made that a very fun Monday night matchup. It was just enough to keep you watching, even though we all kind of wanted to go to bed in seemingly what was a meaningless matchup. But for the Denver Broncos, you stay at 10. You won. It wasn't pretty, but at the end of the day, all that matters is the win-loss department, and you found success in that in week 13. Now, the player of the week, as you guys know here on the channel, this is a mirror segment. So to me, I was talking to him. I tried to convince him. I tried to, sway him in any different way. I think the player of the week should have been the tight end there in Las Vegas, Brock Bowers, the guy that had 10 receptions, 140 yards, and I believe 1 or 2 touchdowns. Regardless, Brock Bowers at this level that he's at is playing like I thought Kyle Pitts would have played in his early career. But Brock Bowers is such a special player. He's single-handedly the only bright spot that Vegas team has this season. And I think, hey, no matter who the quarterback is for Vegas next season, they're going to quickly find their best friend on the field in Brock Bowers. But Amir's pick on the week, it's not a bad one, right? Don't get me wrong. A guy that was 13 of 17 on a key matchup there against an NFC West opponent. 170 total yards, 3 total touchdowns. A guy that basically had a passing, rushing, and a receiving touchdown. First player ever in a single game. And he's a quarterback that led his team to a 7th straight victory. If you haven't picked up by now, let's unwrap the present here in the month of December. It's Josh Allen, right? A guy that, again, MVP frontrunner, huge win against the San Francisco 49ers, which, even though they've had injuries, that defense is still intact, and it's still a very good defense, at least as far as a talent perspective, but it did not matter. The Bills were able to do whatever they wanted. They utilized that home field advantage, and Josh Allen led his team in a key matchup with no turnovers, by the way, on his end, and they got a big-time win to keep their hopes alive to get the number 1 seed in the AFC. So, again, not a bad pick. I would have went Bowers, but regardless, either or, both great player of the week options. Now, let's get into our favorite bets on the week. I'll go through Amir's as best as I possibly can. I know he likes to bring a essay worth of data, but I'll do the basic reasoning behind those. Player props last week. By the way, if you parlayed both of our our picks last week, all 6 of our picks last week hit. I should have started with that. All right. But again, all 6 of our picks hit last week. So if you parlayed them or if you just took them as straight bets, you're pretty happy as far as your financial situation. Now, my favorite player prop on the week is Mike Evans, a guy that is still, let's say, 400 to 500 yards away from getting 1,000 yards on the season. So he needs these big-time performances with only about a month or so left of football to get that 1,000-yard mark. Now, why is that important? Well, right now he's tied with Jerry Rice for the most consecutive 1,000-yard seasons to start a career. Mike Evans I believe he's at 10 or 11. Regardless, he wants to break the record. He wants to have this solely in his possession. And with Chris Godwin out, with Cade Otton, that really is the only other big receiving option in this offense, outside of the occasional Bucky Irving. Mike Evans is in a great spot to get this. And I believe against the New York Giants, that are a defense that is not playing to the level that they should be. We know there's questions on this back end of the New York Giants defense. Look, the Giants are more focused on getting a top pick in the draft more so than stopping Mike Evans. I think he gets a huge day, maybe 80, 85 yards if you want to ladder this up. And I think he keeps his hopes alive as far as getting that 1,000-yard mark. Now, Amir is going more so to what history tells us. And that tells us that Jordan Love, even though he might have 4 touchdowns, that might come with 2 to 3 turnovers. And of course, most of those are interceptions. Now, he's playing a tough Detroit Lions secondary and defense in general. And if this run game can't get going for Green Bay, like it should, by the way, tonight, he's going to have to put the ball in the air. And with this talented secondary in Detroit, I think, hey, Jordan Love's a gunslinger. He's going to put the ball in 50-50 situations because he does trust Christian Watson and Jayden Reed down the field. And if one of those doesn't go his way, well, again, Jordan Love's prone to throw an interception almost every other week. And I think, again, he's going to throw one probably tonight in that Thursday night game. So that's Amir's favorite prop on the week. I don't bet interceptions. I stay away from that, right? Very wishy-washy unless it's Jameis Winston. The favorite spread picks on the week, as you guys saw before, I think Atlanta wins outright here against the Minnesota Vikings. But if you want to play it safe, over on Caesars Sportsbook, of course, the Atlanta Falcons are given 6.5 points on the road in Kirk Cousins' revenge game there against the Minnesota Vikings. So should be a high-scoring shootout, but I could see a game where it's 31-28 minutes or Atlanta, right? Or if you think Minnesota's going to win, I think it could be a 34-31 kind of a game where Atlanta has a really good week regardless of the win-loss department, and I think they keep it close against the Vikings. For Amir, he's going with the Cincinnati Bengals, -5.5, Monday Night Football, just getting a huge win on the road against Dallas. They have the offense. We know Joe Burrow, if this Cincinnati Bengals team was in the playoff mix, I think it would be consensus that the Joe Burrow should be the MVP of the league this year. That is the level that he is playing at. And I could throw you guys all these different stats, but just watch the games, right? It's not more so just a stat sheet kind of a thing. Joe Burrow is the only bright spot of this team outside of Ja'Marr Chase this season. He is single-handedly the reason why this team has a couple wins. This team has lost so many one-score games, it's really sickening, right? And again, this team should definitely have at least 7 or 8 wins on the season, but of course, they are far from that. Regardless, the talent is there, and Joe Burrow wants to continue this dominant season, so Amir has them carving up the Dallas defense there. Favorite over-unders on the week. I'm going to go with the under here in this AFC South. Well, I don't really want to call it a shootout. I don't really know what to call it. The Tennessee Titans are at home against the Jacksonville Jags. And look, it's Mac Jones on one side. It's Will Levis on the other. This Tennessee offense has looked better in recent weeks, but Jacksonville, these teams, I believe, it's just going to be an ugly game. It's going to be a 17-13 bout, no matter who wins, right? It might even be 21-17. Regardless, I don't see a lot of points scored in this one, and I think Tennessee probably ekes out the win due to Mac Jones being the quarterback, but I just can't see these teams putting up a ton of points in a tough divisional matchup. Now, for Amir, he went with, again, that San Fran matchup that I mentioned prior in the episode, where he has the Bears putting up a fight in this matchup. Of course, maybe Caleb Williams continues to shine in a big-time game here against a tough defense. And then the Niners, on the other hand, they're probably just going to rely on Isaiah Guerendo, right? Isaac Guerendo, of course, the rookie running back out of Louisville. We loved his tape. He had an incredible combine. And with Jordan Mason and Christian McCaffrey going down in the same week, Isaac Guerendo goes from the running back 3, who played 2 snaps a game, to getting a full workload in this San Francisco offense. Isaac Guerendo is going to be a huge play this week in fantasy football, and I believe he has a huge day, probably 1 or 2 touchdowns. I can definitely see this going over. Maybe it's a game where it's 31-27, right? 31-24, right? If you want to follow the spread. I think this game definitely goes over that 43.5 point mark. So again, I can second Amir's pick here. But again, I like my pick a little bit better. I like going under on these teams that are trying to get draft positioning more so than an actual win. The last thing we'll close out with the show with today is the race for Travis. Or, of course, you could say race for the number 1 pick, as some of these teams Maybe they go a different route. Maybe they do go with a quarterback like the Las Vegas Raiders. But Jacksonville stays at 1. Of course, now they're going to stay at 1 the remainder of the year. Now that Trevor Lawrence is pretty much done for the year. By the way, right, Trevor Lawrence, get down earlier. I understand it was a dirty hit, but you gotta know if these defenders are their goal is to stop the offense. Their goal is to be aggressive, and their goal in divisional matchups are to sometimes hit a little harder than you would. Now, Azeez shouldn't have hit Trevor Lawrence, at least to the degree that he did. But again, I come to the defense of Azeez there. Trevor Lawrence, get down to the ground earlier, unless you're prepared to take a hit like that. Now, Jacksonville stays at 1. Mac Jones is their guy going forward, outside of maybe a couple splash weeks from ETN or a couple good games from Brian Thomas Jr. They're getting ready to draft either a new tackle, maybe Travis Hunter, or maybe they trade down, and of course, surprises on day 1 of the draft. The Raiders, I don't think they're winning another game. I think they're going to finish the year either with 2 or 3 wins, and they're going to put themselves in the best situation possible for the also coveted Shedeur Sanders. Giants, similar situation. You need a quarterback, and if you stay at 3, Cam Ward is going to be your guy. 4, New England, of course, Carolina at 5. Carolina's not going to stay here. I could see them winning maybe 2 or 3 more games, and they'll be a team that goes after a Will Johnson out of Michigan, right? Or a Mason Graham out of Michigan. One of those guys that can really fill a big void, which there are many here in Carolina. But Carolina, again, I don't think they'll be here. Maybe it's a Cleveland Browns, or maybe it's a different team here that currently sucks, right? But I don't think Carolina stays in the top 5. That's episode 232. Again, I apologize. Amir could not make the show today, but hopefully you still enjoyed. I mean, this podcast was built with me and you guys. So if you enjoyed, drop a like and subscribe to the channel. It's episode 232, and we're in December officially. So a lot of fun weather conditions coming up here in the NFL slate. But I'll see you guys next week. Of course, we have a lot of great episodes planned. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, leave it down below, and I'll get back to you as quick as I can. If not, go enjoy some football. We have a good one tonight.